Before there was Zeus, before Mount Olympus, before the gods we all know, there were older beings, vast, powerful, and terrifying. The ancient Greeks believed the world began in darkness and chaos, and out of that came the first creatures, the Titans, who ruled long before the Olympians. But their reign was not eternal. A prophecy whispered of betrayal, of children rising up against their parents, of a war that would shake the very foundations of the earth. Imagine a world where mountains were living beings, where rivers were gods, and where the sky itself could be overthrown. That is where our story begins. Tonight, I'll take you back to those ancient times, not with rushing battles and noise, but with gentle, steady words. Together, we'll walk through the myths step by step, from Titans to Olympians, and uncover how the Greeks imagined their world was shaped. So, get comfortable, close your eyes if you like, and let's drift into the timeless story of Greek mythology. In the beginning, before there were mountains, seas, or even the sky, the ancient Greeks believed there was only chaos. Now, when we hear the word chaos today, we usually think of noise, confusion, or wild disorder. But to the Greeks, chaos was not exactly a storm or a mess. It was more like a great, endless emptiness, a yawning void where nothing had form yet. Imagine looking out into an infinite darkness without stars, without air, without even the idea of up or down. That was where everything began. Out of this quiet and shapeless space, the first thing slowly came into existence, as if the universe was just beginning to take a deep breath. The Greeks told their stories of creation in many different ways, but they all carried a sense of awe at how the world emerged from nothing. From chaos came Gaia, the earth, a solid ground beneath everything else. Gaia was not just the dirt or soil, but the very being of the earth itself. Mountains, plains, and valleys that would one day host forests and cities. She was the mother figure, the source of life, the one who gave a place for all other things to stand. Alongside Gaia appeared Tartarus, a deep and shadowy pit far beneath the earth, a place of mystery and dread. Some saw it as a prison, others as a realm of raw potential. And then came Eros, not yet the mischievous winged god of love we often imagine, but a more powerful force, the spark of attraction, the pull that made things come together and form. Without Eros, the Greeks believed, nothing could have united, and the world would have remained an empty silence. From these first presences, others were born. Erebus, the darkness that filled the hidden corners of the world, and Nyx, the night, who wrapped everything in her quiet veil. With them came Hemera, the day, and Ether, the bright upper air that touched the heavens. The Greeks imagined the universe taking shape almost like a family tree, each new figure embodying an essential piece of existence: night and day, earth and sky, love and void. It was less about science and more about symbols, but to the people of ancient Greece these stories explained why the world felt so balanced, how opposites like light and dark, above and below, could both exist and need each other. Gaia, the earth, began to give birth to more forms. She produced Uranus, the sky, a vast dome that stretched over her and covered her completely. Together, Gaia and Uranus formed a pair that made the world whole. Earth below, sky above, the stage for everything else to come. From their union came the Titans, powerful beings who would one day rule, and the Cyclopes, the one-eyed giants, and the hundred-handed creatures immense and terrifying. To the Greeks, these beings represented the raw forces of nature: storms, earthquakes, volcanoes, and all the untamed power of the world before it was settled. What makes these myths fascinating is that they were not simply told as entertainment. They were attempts to understand why the world was the way it was. Why was the earth solid beneath one's feet? Because Gaia existed. Why did the sky seem endless and protective? Because Uranus stretched above it. Why did love and desire seem to move all living things? Because Eros was there from the start. The myths gave human shapes and personalities to these questions, making the unknown feel a little more familiar. The Greeks also found beauty in the idea that creation did not begin perfectly ordered. Instead, it came from emptiness, from chaos, and gradually became shaped by relationships, births, and struggles. In a way, it reflected how they saw life itself, unpredictable, often difficult, but always moving toward form and meaning. To them, the gods were not distant beings in another world, but part of the very fabric of existence. Every hill, every breeze, every star carried a trace of that first story of creation. Imagine being a person in ancient Greece, lying under a clear night sky with no city lights to interrupt the view. You look up and see thousands of stars, bright and mysterious, and you wonder where it all came from. You don't have telescopes or science books, but you do have stories passed down from elders, stories that explain the night and the day, the earth and the heavens. These stories are told by the fire, sung in poems, carved in stone. They bring comfort and meaning, turning the overwhelming vastness of existence into something that feels like family, with parents and children, quarrels and reconciliations, beginnings and endings. The story of chaos and the birth of the first beings is just the opening to the much larger tale of Greek mythology. It sets the stage for all the drama to come, the struggles of titans, the rise of Olympians, and the countless adventures of gods and heroes. But at its heart, it is a reminder of how human beings, no matter the time or place, have always asked the same questions. Where did we come from? Why does the world look like this? And how can we make sense of what feels so vast and mysterious? The Greeks answered these questions not with scientific formulas, but with myths. Myths that spoke to both their fears and their hopes. In their telling, the world was never empty, not even in the beginning. There was always chaos, and from chaos, there was always the possibility of something more. Out of darkness, light would come. Out of silence, stories would be told. And out of nothingness, the earth, the sky, and all of creation would unfold. So, in the beginning, there was not a clean slate or a neat order, but a deep, boundless void. From it came Gaia, Uranus, Nyx, Eros, and many more, shaping the first breaths of existence. And in those breaths, the Greeks found not just the origin of their gods, but the origin of themselves, their world, and the timeless stories that would echo through centuries. From the first stirrings of chaos and the steady forming of Gaia and Uranus, the story of Greek mythology began to take on the shape of a family drama, with parents, children, rivalries, and betrayals. This was not just a tale of natural forces coming into being, it was also the beginning of the personalities and conflicts that would define the myths for generations to come. The ancient Greeks didn't picture their gods as distant or flawless beings, but as figures who mirrored the struggles of human life, only on a much grander scale. At the heart of this early story stood Gaia, the earth, and Uranus, the sky, locked together as the first great pair of creation, and from them came the Titans, the first generation of truly powerful beings. Gaia, the nurturing mother, represented the fertile ground that could bring forth life again and again. Uranus, stretching endlessly above, was the protective dome of the heavens, a presence that seemed eternal. Together, they became the first couple of the cosmos, and like all unions in mythology, theirs was fruitful but complicated. From their joining came the Titans, 12 mighty beings, each one representing different aspects of existence. Oceanus, who embodied the endless waters that surrounded the earth. Hyperion, linked to light. Theia, connected with shining and vision. Rhea, a nurturing figure who would later become a mother of gods. Cronus, who would rise to take a dark and central role in the story. Each Titan was vast in power and scope, as if Gaia and Uranus had poured pieces of the cosmos into their children. But Gaia's womb did not only give birth to the Titans. From her also came the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants of tremendous strength and skill, known for their craftsmanship. They were fierce and raw, but also essential in shaping the tools of power, such as thunderbolts and weapons for the gods to come. Then came the Hecatoncheires, terrifying beings with 100 arms and 50 heads each. Their sheer size and power made them uncontrollable, and Uranus, fearing them, turned cold toward his own children. Instead of welcoming them into the world, he forced the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires back into the depths of Gaia, burying them within her, pressing them down into the earth's belly. This act was one of the first betrayals in Greek mythology, and it set the stage for countless struggles between parents and children. Gaia, though vast and enduring, felt pain. Having her children imprisoned inside her was unbearable. She loved all her offspring, even the strange and frightening ones, and she resented Uranus for chaining them beneath the earth. Slowly, her nurturing spirit turned to anger. She began to plot. In her heart, she knew that the only way to end Uranus's tyranny was through one of her children, one bold enough to stand against the sky himself. Among the Titans, one stepped forward: Cronus. He was ambitious, clever, and ruthless, qualities that made him different from his brothers and sisters. While others hesitated, Cronus listened to Gaia's plan. She fashioned a great sickle of sharp stone and gave it to him, placing into his hands both the weapon and the destiny to strike down his father. It was a shocking moment, the first real act of rebellion in the mythic family tree. Cronus, armed with Gaia's sickle, lay in wait for Uranus, and when Uranus descended to embrace the earth, Cronus struck, wounding his father and forever changing the balance of power in the universe. The fall of Uranus was not just a personal betrayal, it was the end of an age. From his blood, new beings were said to be born, including the Furies, who would later haunt those who shed family blood, and the Giants, fierce warriors destined to battle the gods. From the sea foam where Uranus's body touched the waves, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, would one day arise. Even in his downfall, Uranus gave rise to new forces that would shape mythology forever. With Uranus defeated, Cronus took his place as ruler. The Titans now reigned, and this became known as the Age of the Titans. At first glance, it seemed like a new beginning, but this age would also carry its own shadows. Cronus, who had seized power through betrayal, would soon find himself haunted by the same fear as his father, the fear of being overthrown by his own children. But that part of the story belonged to another chapter. For now, the first generation had risen, and the Titans stood as the rulers of the cosmos, vast and powerful, each carrying within them the essence of the universe. For the ancient Greeks, these stories of Gaia, Uranus, and the Titans were not just tales of gods but reflections of the natural world and human experience. Parents and children, love and conflict, creation and destruction, they all existed in the myths because they all existed in life. The sky and the earth had to come together to create the world, but even in their union there was tension. The children who were born were strong, sometimes too strong, and the fear of losing control shaped the choices of those in power. These themes were timeless, echoing in families, communities, and kingdoms across the centuries. As you imagine this first generation of beings, think of a time when the world itself felt young, raw, and untamed. The earth was not yet mapped or settled. The seas were vast and mysterious. The stars above seemed unreachable. To explain all this, the Greeks created a family of gods, each one carrying the weight of the cosmos in their being. From chaos to Gaia and Uranus, from Titans to the strange children hidden away, the story grew layer by layer, just like the world itself. And so, the first generation was born. Not human, not even entirely divine as we think of gods, but embodiments of forces greater than any one person. Their struggles would shape the next chapters of myth, leading to battles, betrayals, and the eventual rise of a new family who would one day sit upon Mount Olympus. But before that could happen, the Age of the Titans had to play out in all its grandeur and fear. When Cronus took the throne after striking down his father Uranus, the world entered what the Greeks called the Age of Titans. At first, this new age seemed strong and steady. The Titans were vast beings, each tied to some force of the natural world, and together they ruled the cosmos. Cronus, clever and ambitious, now stood as king, and beside him was Rhea, his sister and consort. Their brothers and sisters spread out across existence: Oceanus, the endless river that circled the world; Hyperion, linked to the light of the heavens; Themis, who represented divine order and law; Mnemosyne, the memory that preserved stories; and others who embodied pieces of life and the universe. For a while it seemed as though the Titans would reign forever, unchallenged and secure. But the Greeks, who loved to weave their myths with warnings and patterns, knew that power is never without its shadows. Just as Uranus had feared his children, so too would Cronus carry a heavy burden. Before his rise, an oracle, or perhaps Gaia herself, had whispered a prophecy, that one day Cronus would be overthrown by his own offspring, just as he had betrayed his father. For a ruler who had seized power through rebellion, this warning was especially terrifying. Cronus knew too well what children could do to their parents, and the thought of losing his throne haunted him. Still, the age of Titans moved forward. Under Cronus, the world was shaped and ordered. Rivers carved paths through the land. The sun and moon rose with dependable rhythm, and the seas rolled endlessly. To the ancient Greeks, this era explained the foundation of existence, a time when the raw chaos of the earliest days had settled into something more stable. Yet, stability built on fear cannot last forever. Cronus, though mighty, grew anxious, and with each child born to him and Rhea, his dread deepened. The children of Cronus and Rhea were powerful from the start. They were not strange giants like the Cyclopes or monstrous beings with 100 arms. These children would one day become the Olympians, the gods who defined Greek mythology for centuries. But to Cronus, they were only threats. Each time Rhea gave birth, Cronus swallowed the newborn whole, hiding them inside his vast body. One after another, the children disappeared. Hestia, goddess of the hearth; Demeter, linked to the harvest; Hera, destined to become queen of the gods; Hades, lord of the underworld; and Poseidon, master of the sea. Cronus believed that by consuming them, he could prevent the prophecy from coming true. Yet, in doing so, he turned his fear into cruelty, creating bitterness that would one day rise against him. Rhea, heartbroken, watched as her children vanished into her husband's grasp. She was a nurturing figure, tied to motherhood itself, and the loss of her offspring tore at her spirit. Eventually, she could bear it no longer. When she became pregnant once more, she sought help, just as Gaia had once sought Cronus to rebel against Uranus. Rhea turned to Gaia and Uranus, who guided her in secret. When the time came, she gave birth to her youngest son, Zeus, not in the open halls of the Titans, but in a hidden cave on the island of Crete. There, away from Cronus's gaze, Zeus was raised in secrecy, cared for by nymphs and guarded by spirits who drowned out his cries with the clash of their weapons. Cronus, meanwhile, was handed a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes, which he swallowed without question, believing he had consumed his final child. This moment marked the beginning of the end for the Age of Titans. Though Cronus still ruled, the seed of rebellion had been planted. Just as he had once betrayed his father, so too would one of his children rise to challenge him. In Zeus, the Greeks saw the embodiment of renewal, the next generation waiting to emerge from the shadows of fear and tyranny. Still, for many years, Cronus continued his reign. The Titans spread across the world, their influence touching every corner of existence. Oceanus flowed endlessly, his daughters becoming rivers and streams. Hyperion's children, Helios, Selene, and Eos, brought the sun, moon, and dawn to the sky. Mnemosyne gave birth to the Muses, who would inspire poets and artists for all time. Even in the age of fear, creation continued, because in mythology, life always finds a way to grow, even under heavy rule. Yet beneath this order, tension was building. Rhea longed to see her children freed. The swallowed gods, still alive within Cronus, waited for release. Zeus, growing stronger in his hidden cave, prepared to take the role fate had promised him. The Greeks loved this cycle, where one generation replaced another, not peacefully but through struggle. To them, it reflected the natural order of life. Parents passing on to children, power never staying still, change always arriving whether welcomed or not. So the Age of Titans was both a time of greatness and of unease. The Titans were vast, powerful, and elemental, shaping the early world with their presence. But their ruler was haunted by fear, and fear always breeds downfall. Cronus's desperate attempts to hold on to power only made his fate more certain, and his betrayal of his own children ensured that one day they would rise against him. In telling this story, the Greeks were not only explaining their gods but also teaching something about life. Power gained through betrayal leads to more betrayal. Fear of change cannot stop change from coming. And no matter how great the rulers of one age may be, another generation will always follow. As you let this story settle in your mind, picture the world under the Titans. Vast mountains and endless seas, dawn breaking and night falling in a steady rhythm, the earth firm and the sky wide. It was a world ordered but uneasy, a stage waiting for the next act. And somewhere in a quiet cave, a child grew in secret, a child who would one day bring that act to life. Cronus ruled as the king of the Titans, yet even with all his power, he could never find peace. Every moment of his reign was haunted by the whisper of prophecy, the same kind of warning that had once doomed his father, Uranus. It was said that just as Cronus had risen up against his parent, so too would one of his own children rise up against him. The prophecy clung to him like a shadow, following him through the halls of his palace, echoing in the silence of the night, and twisting even the joy of ruling into unease. For the ancient Greeks, this prophecy reflected a truth they knew well, that time cannot be stopped, and power is never permanent. Cronus tried to push these thoughts away, surrounding himself with the other Titans and with Rhea, his queen. The world seemed ordered under his rule. Day and night came regularly, the seas rolled without end, and the earth produced life in abundance. From the outside, it appeared to be a golden age. But beneath the surface, Cronus's fear grew. He could not shake the memory of how easily he had struck down his father. He had been young and bold, guided by Gaia's plan, and in a single act he had changed the fate of the cosmos. What if one of his own children, filled with the same daring spirit, decided to do the same to him? This fear poisoned every joy that should have come with fatherhood. Each time Rhea gave birth, Cronus did not see a child. He saw a threat. He convinced himself that swallowing them whole would keep him safe, that if he consumed their power, he could escape the prophecy. And so, one after another, his children disappeared into his belly, alive but trapped in darkness. Hestia, goddess of the hearth; Demeter, who would one day preside over crops and harvest; Hera, destined to be queen of the gods; Hades, who would rule beneath the earth; and Poseidon, whose domain was the sea. All of them swallowed, all of them lost to their mother's embrace. For Rhea, the pain was unbearable. She was a mother robbed of her children, her arms empty again and again. Her love for Cronus faded with every birth, replaced by sorrow and resentment. Yet she kept silent, unable to challenge him, for Cronus's power was too great. Still, in her heart, she began to wonder if there was a way to outwit him, a way to save at least one of her children from his hunger. The prophecy loomed over them both, but they faced it differently. Cronus tried to outrun it through control and cruelty, while Rhea began to hope that fate could not be so easily denied. In mythology, prophecy was never just a prediction. It was a force, a thread woven into the fabric of the world. Trying to avoid it often led directly to its fulfillment. The Greeks told these stories not only to entertain, but to remind listeners that fate has a way of catching up to even the most powerful. As the years passed, Cronus grew restless. Though he sat on the throne of the Titans, surrounded by his siblings and their offspring, he trusted no one fully. He feared not only his children but even the whispers of rebellion from others. He remembered too clearly how he himself had been the instrument of his father's downfall. Would some nephew, cousin, or even his own wife conspire against him? The palace of the Titans, once a symbol of strength, became a cage of suspicion. Meanwhile, the swallowed children lived on inside him, their divine essence undiminished. It was said they grew restless, shifting and stirring in the dark as if waiting for the moment to be freed. Cronus felt their presence within him, another reminder that his attempt to escape the prophecy was only temporary. He had delayed their rise, but he had not ended it. The prophecy of doom was not just about Cronus, it was about the cycle of power itself. One generation overthrows the previous, and then the next rises to overthrow them in turn. The Greeks saw this as part of the natural rhythm of the universe, like the changing of the seasons or the rising and setting of the sun. Just as no day lasts forever, no reign can endure without end. Rhea's sorrow deepened with each child taken from her, but her quiet endurance was not weakness. In silence, she carried the seed of resistance. She would not allow all her children to be lost. Somewhere in her heart, she began to wait for the right moment, the chance to act. And that chance would come with her next child, the one who would not be swallowed, the one who would fulfill the prophecy not by accident, but by design. The story of Cronus and the prophecy is one of the most human parts of Greek mythology. Despite being gods, the Titans were trapped by the same emotions that trouble people: fear of loss, dread of the future, mistrust of family, and the weight of inevitable change. Cronus's attempts to control fate only brought him closer to it, while Rhea's quiet hope planted the foundation for the world of the Olympians. And so the age of Titans, though vast and powerful, was fragile at its core. It rested on fear, on a king who swallowed his heirs in desperation, and on a prophecy that would not go away no matter how deeply he tried to bury it. Every act of cruelty, every child taken from its mother, brought Cronus closer to the end he dreaded. The prophecy did not simply hang above him. It lived within him, growing stronger with every choice he made. As the story moved forward, it was not a question of if the prophecy would come true, but when. Somewhere on the horizon, the shadow of change was already forming, and in that shadow, a new god was waiting to rise. When Rhea became pregnant once again, she felt both joy and dread. The joy of carrying new life stirred within her, but the dread of what awaited the child pressed heavily on her heart. She knew the cycle too well. Birth, the brief moment of wonder, and then the cruel act as Cronus swallowed yet another of their children whole. She could not bear it again. This time, she vowed, things would be different. Quietly, she began to plan. Rhea sought the counsel of Gaia, the earth herself, who had once helped Cronus overthrow Uranus. Gaia understood her daughter's sorrow and her resolve, for she too had watched her children suffer. Together, they devised a plan that would preserve the child and perhaps, one day, bring balance to the world again. Rhea's labor came, but instead of presenting the newborn to Cronus as before, she slipped away in secret. In a hidden cave on the island of Crete, she gave birth to a boy, strong, bright-eyed, and full of the energy of the cosmos. His name was Zeus. The cave where Zeus was born was shielded by trees and mountains, far from Cronus's gaze. There, nymphs and spirits cared for him tenderly. Amalthea, a nurturing goat, suckled the child with her milk, while protective spirits known as the Curetes surrounded the cave. These guardians danced and clashed their weapons together whenever the infant cried, drowning out the sound so that Cronus would never hear. In this way, Zeus grew in safety, nourished and hidden, while his brothers and sisters remained trapped inside their father. But Cronus still demanded proof that Rhea had delivered the child to him. So, following Gaia's instructions, Rhea swaddled a stone in cloth and handed it to her husband. Cronus, blinded by fear and suspicion, did not question it. He swallowed the bundle whole, believing he had consumed his final child. He never realized the truth, that the child destined to overthrow him still lived, growing stronger with each passing day. As Zeus grew, he learned of his strange fate. The nymphs who cared for him whispered stories of the world beyond the cave, of the Titans who ruled, and the brothers and sisters he had never met. He understood that he was not just a child, but a secret weapon of destiny, hidden away until the time was right. The Greeks imagined him growing in strength, climbing mountains, running with wild animals, and absorbing the wisdom of the natural world. The cave became his home, but it could not contain him forever. Meanwhile, Cronus ruled on, unaware of the danger forming in his shadow. The Titans continued their dominion, their powers stretching across the cosmos. But the prophecy had not disappeared. It lingered, a silent thread woven into every story. Cronus had delayed it, but he had not escaped it. Every moment that Zeus lived, the prophecy drew closer to being fulfilled. In this chapter of the myth, there is a quiet beauty alongside the fear. The story of Zeus' birth is not just about destiny and rebellion. It is also about a mother, as love and courage. Rhea, who had suffered loss after loss, finally found the strength to resist. Her decision to save Zeus was an act of hope, the belief that even against overwhelming power, change was possible. To the ancient Greeks, this story carried a lesson. Even in the darkest circumstances, a single act of defiance can alter the course of history. As Zeus grew older, he began to prepare for the role that awaited him. He was not reckless or impatient. He learned patience, strength, and cunning. When the time came, he would need not only force but also strategy to challenge his father. The Greeks knew that heroes and gods alike could not rise without trials, and Zeus's trial was to wait, hidden, until the world was ready for him to emerge. The cave on Crete, the goat Amalthea, the curettes with their clashing weapons, all these details became symbols in the Greek imagination. They were reminders that even the greatest gods began in vulnerability, relying on the care and courage of others. Zeus was destined for greatness, but his survival depended first on secrecy and protection. The Greeks cherished these stories not only for their grandeur, but for their humanity. Even the mightiest king of the gods began life as a fragile child, hidden from danger, saved by a mother's desperate love. The birth of Zeus was more than just the arrival of another god. It was the turning point of the age. Cronus believed himself secure, but in truth, his downfall was already sealed. The prophecy had taken root, not in abstract words, but in a living, breathing child, hidden in a cave, waiting for his moment. The age of the Titans was strong, but cracks had begun to show, and through those cracks a new light was already shining. As the story moved forward, Zeus would not remain hidden forever. One day, he would rise from the shadows, confront his father, and free his siblings from the prison of Cronus's stomach. That day would mark the end of the Titan Age and the beginning of something new, the reign of the Olympians. But for now, Zeus remained in his cave, a secret hope, growing stronger with every passing moment. The day finally came, when Zeus could no longer remain hidden. He had grown into a powerful young god, strong in body and sharp in mind, and he carried within him the knowledge that his life had always been tied to destiny. The whispers of prophecy still lingered over the cosmos, reminding all that Cronus would one day be undone by his own child. Zeus knew that the time had come for him to act, not only to claim his place in the world, but to free his brothers and sisters who had been trapped in their father's stomach for so long. The plan to begin the Great Rebellion did not form overnight. Zeus was wise enough to understand that he could not simply confront Cronus directly. His father was cunning and immensely powerful, and the Titans were vast forces of the universe themselves. To challenge them, Zeus would need allies and strategy. So, step by step, he began to prepare. With guidance from Gaia, who still longed to see justice done, Zeus sought the help of Metis, a goddess known for her cleverness and resourcefulness. She brewed a special potion, a powerful mixture that would force Cronus to release what he had swallowed. Disguising himself, Zeus approached Cronus and tricked him into drinking the potion. The effect was immediate and violent. Cronus, once the mighty ruler of the cosmos, suddenly convulsed and began to disgorge the children he had swallowed long ago. One by one, they emerged fully grown, divine and powerful: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. After years of darkness, they were finally free, and they joined Zeus with gratitude and determination. Now, the prophecy had truly awakened. The children of Cronus stood united, ready to challenge their father and the Titans for the fate of the cosmos. What followed was the Titanomachy, the great war between the Titans and the Olympians. It was said to last for 10 years, a struggle that shook the earth, the heavens, and the seas. The Titans, led by Cronus, fought with the fury of beings who had ruled since the dawn of time. They were vast, elemental forces, each one embodying pieces of creation itself. Mountains split, oceans roared, and the skies cracked with thunder as the Titans battled to defend their reign. But the Olympians were equally fierce, and though they were younger, they carried the energy of renewal. Zeus wielded thunderbolts forged by the Cyclopes, who had been freed from their imprisonment. These one-eyed giants, once cast down by Uranus, now repaid Zeus by creating weapons of immense power. The thunderbolt became Zeus's signature weapon, a blazing strike of light and destruction that could shake the very foundations of the earth. Poseidon fought with his mighty trident, stirring storms and earthquakes, while Hades used his unseen power to move through shadows and strike where least expected. Hera, Demeter, and Hestia, too, lent their strength, each adding to the unity of the Olympians. Another crucial ally in this war was the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed giants whom Uranus had once feared and imprisoned. Freed by Zeus, they unleashed their fury upon the Titans, hurling massive boulders with their countless arms, overwhelming their enemies with sheer force. The battlefield became a chaos of clashing powers, with the old generation struggling desperately against the new. The war was not just a conflict of gods, it was the struggle of time itself. The Titans represented the old order, powerful but stagnant, clinging to their throne through fear and control. The Olympians embodied change, the inevitable shift that comes with each new generation. For the Greeks, this story explained why the world felt alive, why change was constant, why no rule or kingdom could last forever. As the years of war dragged on, the Olympians grew stronger. Zeus proved himself not only as a warrior, but as a leader, able to inspire unity among his siblings and allies. Cronus, by contrast, grew more desperate, consumed by rage and paranoia. His fear, which had driven him to swallow his children, now clouded his judgment on the battlefield. Slowly, the tide began to turn. In the final battles, the Olympians unleashed their full might. Zeus's thunderbolts lit up the skies, Poseidon shook the seas and land, and the Hecatonchires rained down destruction. The Titans fought with ferocity, but one by one they were driven back, overwhelmed by the combined strength of the younger gods. At last, Cronus himself was defeated, and with his fall, the reign of the Titans came to an end. The defeated Titans were cast down into Tartarus, the deepest part of the underworld, a shadowy prison far beneath even Hades' realm. Guarded by the Hecatonchires, they would remain there, unable to rise again. This punishment was not just about vengeance. It was about ensuring that the old order could not return to threaten the new. The cosmos had shifted, and the Olympians now stood as its rulers. The Titanomachy became one of the central myths of Greek mythology, a story of rebellion, war, and renewal. To the Greeks, it was more than just a tale of gods fighting. It was a reflection of the cycles of life and power, where every generation eventually gives way to the next. The rise of Zeus and his siblings explained not only the rule of the Olympians, but also the sense that the world was alive, constantly changing, never still. As the dust of battle settled, the new rulers looked out over the world they had won. Mount Olympus rose above the earth, and there they would make their home, a shining seat of power where they could watch over mortals and gods alike. Zeus had fulfilled the prophecy, but in doing so, he had also set the stage for new stories, new conflicts, and new struggles. For though the Titans had been defeated, the cycle of power was never truly at rest. And so, the great war of the gods ended, and the age of the Titans gave way to the age of the Olympians. From now on, it would be their names, Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Hades, Demeter, Hestia, that echoed across the myths, their choices and conflicts shaping the stories of both gods and mortals. Yet the memory of the Titanomachy lingered, a reminder of how fragile power can be, and how change, though feared, is always inevitable. With the Titans defeated and cast into Tartarus, the world entered a new era, the age of the Olympians. Zeus and his siblings now stood as the rightful rulers of the cosmos, but their victory was not the end of the story. In many ways, it was only the beginning. Winning power is one challenge, but learning how to use it, how to share it, and how to shape the world under it is another. The Greeks imagined this moment as a great reordering of the universe, when the young gods finally claimed their place and began to build the order that mortals would come to know. The first task for Zeus and his siblings was to decide how to divide the world. They had fought together, each bringing strength and courage to the war, but now they faced the question of rulership. To avoid quarrels, the brothers agreed to cast lots, trusting fate to guide them. The outcome of this draw would shape the structure of the cosmos. Zeus, the youngest but most determined, drew the sky, and with it the role of king and father of gods and men. Poseidon received the sea, with all its storms and depths, while Hades was given dominion over the underworld, the shadowy realm of the dead. The earth itself, rich and fertile, was left to be shared by all. This division was more than symbolic. It created balance. The three brothers, though distinct in temperament, each took a realm that suited them. Zeus reigned from the heights of Olympus, watching over the world with his thunderbolts. Poseidon stirred the waters with his trident, his moods reflected in calm seas or raging tempests. Hades, solemn and withdrawn, ruled quietly below, keeping order in the land of shadows. Though each had immense power, their reigns were bound together by necessity. None could rule alone, and none could control everything. While the brothers set the foundation of the cosmos, their sisters also shaped the world. Hera, proud and powerful, became queen of the gods, standing beside Zeus on Olympus. She was not simply a consort, but a force in her own right, representing marriage, family, and authority. Demeter turned her attention to the harvest, ensuring that the earth produced food to sustain life. Hestia tended the hearth, bringing warmth, stability, and a sense of home both to gods and to mortals. Together, they formed a divine family, each playing a role in maintaining balance. With the Olympians now in power, the character of the universe changed. The Titans had been vast, elemental, almost distant forces. The Olympians, by contrast, were closer to human life. They still embodied immense powers, but they also carried personalities, flaws, and desires that mortals could recognize. Zeus could be both a wise king and a jealous husband. Poseidon could bring blessings to sailors or wreck ships in fury. Hera could protect marriage but also unleash vengeance on those who crossed her. This blend of divine grandeur and human-like traits made the Olympians compelling to the Greeks. They were not untouchable ideals, but gods who lived, argued, and quarreled like families do, only on a cosmic scale. The rise of the Olympians also brought order to the chaos that had long threatened the world. Zeus established laws and justice, becoming the guarantor of oaths and the protector of hospitality. Poseidon maintained the restless seas, dangerous but also vital for travel and trade. Hades ensured that the dead had a place to go, creating balance between life and death. Demeter's blessings made agriculture possible, while Hestia's hearth gave mortals a center around which to build their homes. Hera oversaw family and lineage, strengthening the bonds of human society. Together, their reign marked the beginning of a more structured cosmos. But though the Olympians were victorious, their rise was not without challenges. Not all beings accepted their rule. Some Titans who had not fought in the war remained free, watching with resentment or sorrow. Other primordial beings, older than even the Titans, stirred uneasily, their power not yet extinguished. And deep in Tartarus, the imprisoned Titans still raged, their cries echoing faintly through the earth. The Olympians had secured power, but their reign would always be tested by those who resisted or by their own struggles within. For the Greeks, the story of the Olympians' rise was more than myth. It was a way to understand the world they lived in. Just as the gods divided the cosmos, human life was divided into realms of responsibility. Kings who ruled, farmers who worked the land, sailors who braved the seas, families who kept hearth and home. The Olympians were mirrors of these roles, larger than life but still relatable. They explained why storms struck without warning, why crops grew or failed, why families thrived or quarreled. In the imagination of the Greeks, Mount Olympus itself became the symbol of this new age. High above the earth, shrouded in clouds, it was pictured as a shining palace where the gods lived together. From its heights, Zeus and his family could watch over mortals, descending when they wished or sending signs through thunder, waves, or harvests. Olympus was not unreachable, but it was distant enough to remain mysterious, a place of wonder that stood apart from human struggles yet was always connected to them. The Olympians' rise marked a turning point in mythology. The old order of the Titans had fallen, and a new generation had taken its place. But the Greeks, who loved cycles and patterns, knew that this was not the end of the story. Just as the Titans had once overthrown Uranus, and the Olympians had overthrown the Titans, so too could challenges arise in the future. Power was never final, and destiny always hovered close. For now, though, the age of the Olympians had begun, bringing with it the gods whose names would echo through centuries of stories. And so, from the chaos of war, a new order emerged. The Olympians stood on their mountain, each with a realm, each with a role, shaping the world in ways that humans would come to understand through myth. Their reign was not perfect, nor was it peaceful, but it was alive, full of stories that explained both the beauty and the struggles of existence. This was the legacy of their rise, a cosmos not only ruled but also filled with drama, lessons, and the endless interplay between gods and mortals. Zeus had won the throne through war and fate, but holding on to it required something even more difficult: balance. Unlike Cronus, who ruled through fear, or Uranus, who tried to suppress what frightened him, Zeus had to find a way to keep harmony among gods, mortals, and the natural world. To the Greeks, Zeus was not just another king. He was the king of kings, the father of gods and men, and the one whose decisions carried weight across the entire cosmos. Yet he was far from perfect. His reign was marked by wisdom and justice, but also by passion, pride, and the flaws of his very human-like heart. The image of Zeus was powerful and commanding. He was often imagined seated on a grand throne high upon Mount Olympus, a thunderbolt in his hand, his presence radiating authority. The thunderbolt, gifted to him by the Cyclopes, was not only a weapon of war but also a symbol of his judgment. When Zeus struck the sky with lightning, mortals trembled, for they believed it was the sign of his will, a warning not to break oaths or disrespect the order he had established. He was the enforcer of justice, the protector of truth, and the guardian of hospitality. For the Greeks, who lived in a world where strangers often passed through villages and towns, the sacred law of hospitality, xenia, was under Zeus's care. To harm a guest or betray a host was to offend him directly. But Zeus's role was not limited to judgment and law. He was also a figure of immense vitality and desire. Unlike the distant, impersonal Titans, Zeus was deeply involved in the lives of both gods and mortals. His many liaisons, both with divine figures and human women, filled the myths with tales of love, jealousy, and the births of heroes. From these unions came famous figures like Heracles, Perseus, and Helen of Troy, each carrying a spark of divine power into the mortal world. These stories were not told to shame him, but to explain the origins of greatness in human history, and to show that the line between God and mortal was often blurred. Yet these passions brought challenges as well. Hera, his queen, was proud and powerful in her own right, and her jealousy over Zeus's affairs became a recurring theme in mythology. Their marriage was a union of opposites: Zeus, the king, full of vitality and authority, and Hera, the queen, fierce, loyal, but unyielding when wronged. Their quarrels echoed through Olympus, reminding listeners that even in the divine household, love and strife coexisted. For mortals, this was familiar. They could see their own joys and troubles reflected in the stories of the gods, and in this way, the myths became more than just tales. They became mirrors of human life. Beyond his personal life, Zeus's greatest task was to maintain balance among the gods. Olympus was not a quiet place. Each god and goddess had their own domain, their own pride, and their own will. Poseidon, restless and unpredictable, ruled the seas but often tested his brother's patience. Hades, though less confrontational, remained a distant figure in the underworld, carrying out his role in silence. The younger Olympians, Athena with her wisdom, Apollo with his light, Artemis with her wild independence, and many others, added their own voices to the chorus of divine life. Zeus had to keep them united, ensuring that conflicts did not unravel the order they had fought so hard to win. To the Greeks, Zeus was the embodiment of order itself, the force that kept chaos at bay. His throne on Olympus was not just a seat of power, but a symbol of stability. When storms raged, when crops failed, when wars broke out, mortals prayed to Zeus to restore balance. His will was unpredictable at times, but it always carried weight, reminding everyone, gods and mortals alike, that there was a higher authority overseeing all. But Zeus's reign was not built on fear alone. Unlike Cronus, he did not swallow his children or try to suppress the future. Instead, he allowed the next generation of gods to flourish. Athena, born from his own head after a strange and painful ordeal, became one of the wisest and most respected deities. Apollo and Artemis, twins born from Leto, shone brightly as gods of light and the hunt. Hermes, mischievous and clever, became a messenger and guide. Even Ares, the god of war, had a place in Zeus's order, though his fury often caused strife. By allowing these younger gods to thrive, Zeus ensured that the cycle of rebellion that had haunted his father and grandfather would not repeat in the same way. Still, Zeus was not invulnerable. He faced challenges from within and without. At times, even the Olympians conspired against him, frustrated by his authority. Myths told of a moment when Hera, Poseidon, and Athena plotted to overthrow him, binding him in chains. Yet he was saved by the cunning of Thetis and the hundred-handed giant Briareus, who reminded the others of Zeus's unmatched strength. The story showed that even for the king of the gods, rulership required constant vigilance, and power could never be taken for granted. What made Zeus enduring in Greek imagination was not perfection, but balance. He was a figure of justice, but also of passion, a father and protector, but also a flawed being prone to jealousy and desire. In him, the Greeks saw both the greatness and the contradictions of power. His reign was not serene, but dynamic, full of stories that explained why the world was as it was, ordered yet unpredictable, fair yet sometimes cruel. As the king of the gods, Zeus became the anchor of Greek mythology. Every tale of heroes, every quarrel of gods, every lesson about justice and fate traced back to him in some way. His thunderbolts reminded mortals of his presence, his laws shaped their values, and his flaws made him relatable. In his rule, the Greeks found a reflection of life itself, grand, unpredictable, and always balanced between order and chaos. And so, Zeus reigned from Olympus, a figure both feared and loved, his voice echoing through thunder, his watchful eyes gazing from the heavens. He was not simply a god above all gods, but the heart of a mythology that bound together divine power and human experience. His story was not the end of the myths, but the beginning of countless others, each springing from the reign he had secured. Hera was not just the wife of Zeus. She was the queen of Olympus, and in many ways the balance to his authority. Where Zeus ruled the skies and the laws of gods and mortals, Hera embodied the sanctity of marriage, family, and loyalty. Yet her story was far from simple. To the Greeks, Hera was both a revered protector and a formidable force, often feared for her wrath as much as she was honored for her strength. Her presence on Olympus reminded everyone that power was never held by one alone, and that even the king of the gods could not reign without a queen at his side. Hera was imagined as regal, tall and beautiful, draped in garments that flowed like the heavens themselves. Symbols like the peacock with its shimmering feathers and the cow, a creature tied to nurturing and fertility, were often linked to her. She carried herself with dignity and pride, her gaze steady and commanding. When mortals offered prayers for a strong marriage or protection during childbirth, they often turned to Hera, hoping she would bless their homes with stability and love. In this way, she was a guardian of one of the most important bonds in human life, the union between two people and the families that grew from it. Yet, as Queen of Olympus, Hera's role went beyond nurturing. She was fierce when crossed, and her temper was legendary. Much of her anger stemmed from Zeus himself, whose many liaisons with goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women constantly tested her patience. While Zeus's affairs produced children who became heroes and demigods, Hera often responded with jealousy and vengeance. These stories were not meant to belittle her, but to show the complexity of divine relationships. To the Greeks, Hera's fury was not without reason. She defended the sanctity of marriage against betrayal, even if the betrayer was the king of the gods. Myths are filled with tales of Hera's wrath. When Zeus fell in love with the mortal woman Io, Hera transformed the girl into a cow and set a 100-eyed giant, Argus, to guard her. When Heracles, the famous hero, was born from one of Zeus's unions, Hera made his life a constant trial, sending serpents to kill him as a baby and later driving him into madness that caused his greatest suffering. Even gods felt her anger. Her punishments were often harsh, but they reflected her role as protector of loyalty and order. Still, Hera was not simply vengeful. She was also deeply powerful in her own right. She presided over the marriage bed, giving her blessing to unions that were meant to strengthen families and communities. Festivals were held in her honor, such as the Heraia in Olympia, where women competed in foot races dedicated to her. She was a figure of respect, worshipped not only as Zeus' queen, but as a goddess whose power was essential to human life. On Olympus, Hera played a central role in the divine family. She stood as a counterbalance to Zeus, never afraid to challenge him. Their quarrels were famous, but they also revealed that even the gods lived with conflict and compromise. The Greeks, who valued both harmony and struggle in their families, saw in Hera a reflection of the powerful wife and mother whose influence could shape households and kingdoms alike. Hera's personality also gave the myths richness. She was not a distant or one-dimensional figure. She could be nurturing to those she favored, offering guidance and blessings. She could be vindictive to those who disrespected her, ensuring that betrayal never went unanswered. In this way, she embodied both the rewards and the consequences of human relationships. Marriage brought stability and protection, but also responsibilities that could not be ignored. Perhaps what made Hera most compelling was the dignity with which she endured. Despite Zeus's repeated betrayals, she remained queen of the gods, unshaken in her authority. Her pride and power kept her from being overshadowed, and her influence stretched far beyond the personal dramas of Olympus. She was, in many ways, the embodiment of endurance, the strength to hold one's place despite trials, the resolve to defend what was sacred, and the will to shape the lives of both gods and mortals. For the Greeks, Hera's stories carried lessons about the complexities of love and loyalty. She reminded them that even in divine unions, perfection was impossible, and struggles were natural. But she also showed that strength and dignity could endure even through hardship. In her, they saw the protector of family, the guardian of vows, and the fierce defender of her place in the cosmos. And so Hera reigned beside Zeus, not as a shadow, but as a partner, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in conflict, but always central to the life of Olympus. Her presence gave weight to marriage, her wrath gave warning against betrayal, and her power gave balance to the throne of the gods. To speak of Zeus as king without Hera as queen would have been incomplete. Together, they shaped the divine household, and through it, the lives of mortals who prayed to them, feared them, and saw in their struggles the reflection of their own. Poseidon, brother of Zeus and Hades, was given the sea as his domain after the Titanomachy. To the ancient Greeks, who lived in a land surrounded by waves and dotted with islands, Poseidon was not just another god. He was one of the most important figures in their daily lives. The sea was both a blessing and a curse. It offered fish for food, trade routes for wealth, and pathways to distant lands. But it was also unpredictable, capable of swallowing ships whole, stirring storms without warning, and dragging sailors to their deaths. Poseidon embodied this dual nature of the ocean, generous and life-giving one moment, furious and destructive the next. In the imagination of the Greeks, Poseidon was a mighty figure. He was depicted as a tall, muscular god with a thick beard, his hair flowing like waves in a storm. In his hand, he carried a great trident, a three-pronged spear, that could stir the seas and shake the earth itself. With a single strike, he could cause earthquakes, which is why he was also called the Earth Shaker. His chariot was said to be drawn by horses with manes of sea foam, racing across the waves as though the ocean itself were his open road. Poseidon's power was not abstract. It was deeply tied to the realities of Greek life. For a people who depended on the sea for travel and trade, appeasing Poseidon was essential. Sailors prayed to him before voyages, offering sacrifices for calm waters and safe journeys. Cities near the coast built temples in his honor, hoping to secure his favor. Without him, the seas were hostile, but with his blessing, they could be navigated, opening the way to prosperity and discovery. Yet Poseidon was known for his temper. Unlike Zeus, who was associated with order and justice, Poseidon was unpredictable, reflecting the ever-changing nature of the waters he ruled. Myths often described him as quick to anger, holding grudges, and unleashing storms when offended. When mortals failed to honor him properly, or when he felt slighted, he did not hesitate to remind them of his power. Ships could vanish, coastlines could be flooded, and earthquakes could split the ground. His wrath was feared, and his favor was desperately sought. One famous story of Poseidon's temper comes from the contest for Athens. Both Poseidon and Athena desired to be the patron of a new city. To prove their worth, each offered a gift. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident, and from it sprang a saltwater spring, or, in some versions, a horse, a symbol of strength and speed. Athena, however, planted the olive tree, a gift of peace, nourishment, and lasting value. The people chose Athena's gift, and the city became Athens, devoted to her. Poseidon, humiliated, carried his resentment for years, and myths say that he often made life difficult for the Athenians with floods or storms. Despite his temper, Poseidon was not only destructive, he was also a creator. He was believed to have fathered many children, both divine and heroic. Among them were Theseus, the great hero of Athens, Triton, a merman with the body of a man, and the tail of a fish, and countless others who populated the myths. Like the sea itself, Poseidon was fertile and full of life, giving rise to creatures and heroes that enriched Greek storytelling. The Greeks also linked Poseidon with horses. It might seem strange at first, but for them, the power of a galloping horse was like the rolling waves of the sea, wild, unstoppable, and full of energy. They believed Poseidon created the first horse, and so he was worshipped not only as lord of the oceans but also as a god of horses and horsemanship. This connection added another layer to his character, showing that his strength was not limited to the waters but extended to the land as well. Poseidon's personality reflected the Greeks' understanding of the sea. Never fully trustworthy, never fully tame. His moods could shift suddenly, and mortals had to respect that. A calm morning could become a stormy afternoon, just as a peaceful god could become wrathful in an instant. To live in Greece was to live under Poseidon's watch, with every journey across the waves carrying both risk and possibility. On Olympus, Poseidon was not always in harmony with Zeus. Though they were brothers, they sometimes clashed over decisions. Poseidon's pride and quick temper made him resistant to authority, and he occasionally joined conspiracies against Zeus when the king of the gods grew overbearing. Yet, despite these quarrels, Poseidon remained loyal to the balance they had struck after the Titanomachy. He ruled the sea, Zeus the sky, and Hades the underworld, each brother holding his realm with immense power. For the Greeks, Poseidon's importance was deeply practical. Farmers prayed to Demeter for crops, but sailors prayed to Poseidon for survival. A favorable wind, calm seas, or even the absence of earthquakes could mean the difference between life and death. By weaving Poseidon into their myths, they gave shape to the unpredictability of nature. His stories reminded them that the world was not always safe, that respect for the gods was necessary, and that the forces of nature were as much to be honored as they were to be feared. And so Poseidon reigned, not from Olympus alone, but from the depths of the oceans, his palace said to be a glittering hall of coral and gems beneath the waves. From there he commanded the waters, his trident ready to stir storms or calm the seas. To mortals he was both protector and destroyer, the restless god whose domain touched every shore. To the Greeks, Poseidon was a constant reminder that the world they lived in was beautiful, bountiful, and dangerous all at once. Hades, the third brother, ruled not the skies like Zeus or the seas like Poseidon, but the unseen world beneath the earth. The Greeks called it the underworld, a realm of shadows where souls went after death. To mortals, Hades was a figure wrapped in mystery and fear, not because he was cruel, but because he embodied the final truth everyone had to face: death itself. Unlike Zeus, who was loud and commanding, or Poseidon, whose storms and earthquakes reminded people of his presence, Hades was quiet, steady, and relentless. He did not seek the spotlight, yet his authority was absolute, for no one could escape his domain. In art and myth, Hades was often depicted as solemn, dark-bearded, and cloaked in black, holding a staff or key to symbolize his control over the gates of the underworld. He was not typically shown as monstrous or terrifying, but as serious and stern, a ruler who kept order in his realm. He was sometimes called Pluton, meaning the wealthy one, because all the treasures of the earth, precious metals, fertile soil, hidden gems, were his to guard. Just as death claimed all mortals, so too did the earth eventually reclaim their bodies, making Hades both a god of the dead and a god of hidden riches. The underworld itself was imagined in many ways. Some Greeks thought of it as a shadowy place where all souls went, neither cruel nor joyous, just endless and gray. Others believed in a more detailed geography. There was the river Styx, which souls had to cross, ferried by Charon, the boatman who demanded a coin as payment. Families placed coins on the eyes or in the mouths of the dead, so they would not be left stranded. Beyond the river lay different regions: the fields of asphodel where ordinary souls wandered, Elysium, a bright and happy place for the heroic or virtuous, and Tartarus, a deep pit of punishment for the wicked and for enemies of the gods. Hades presided over all of this, ensuring balance and justice. Though his realm was unavoidable, Hades himself was not usually worshipped like the other gods. Few people prayed to him directly, perhaps out of fear of drawing his attention. Instead, offerings were made quietly, sometimes at night, to keep him appeased. While Zeus received grand sacrifices on mountain tops and Poseidon towering temples by the sea, Hades received hushed respect, as though mortals knew he was always near, waiting with patience that stretched beyond a human lifetime. One of the most famous stories involving Hades is the tale of Persephone. According to myth, Hades desired her as his queen, but she was the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest. When Hades carried Persephone into the underworld, Demeter's grief caused the earth to wither, crops failed, and famine spread among humans. Eventually, Zeus intervened, and a compromise was struck. Persephone would spend part of the year with her mother on the surface, and part of the year with Hades in the underworld. To the Greeks, this explained the seasons: spring and summer when Persephone returned and the earth blossomed, autumn and winter when she departed and Demeter mourned. This story showed another side of Hades. Though stern and unyielding, he was also a figure of permanence and stability. He was not reckless or loud like his brothers. Once he claimed Persephone, he kept her faithfully as his queen, treating her with the respect of a partner in rulership. Together they became symbols of the cycle of life and death, of loss and return, of endings and new beginnings. The Greeks did not see Hades as evil, despite their fear of him. He did not cause death. He simply received the dead. In some ways, he was even fairer than the other gods. He did not play favorites, for all mortals, rich or poor, young or old, king or beggar, eventually came to him. His realm was one of equality, where titles and wealth mattered little, and where only deeds and fate shaped a soul's destiny. Still, Hades' name was often avoided in conversation. To speak it too freely was thought unlucky. Instead, people used epithets or nicknames, calling him the Unseen One or the Rich One. This quiet fear reflected the Greeks' uneasy relationship with death. They respected its inevitability, but they also longed for comfort and stories that made it less final. Myths of heroes visiting the underworld, like Orpheus searching for Eurydice or Heracles on his labors, offered glimpses of what lay beyond, even if only the bravest could walk those paths and return. Hades also played a role in the cosmic balance between the three brothers. While Zeus oversaw the heavens and Poseidon ruled the seas, Hades anchored the cycle of existence. Without him, there could be no renewal, no place for souls to rest, no connection between the living and the dead. His rule was less visible but just as essential, reminding the Greeks that even the gods needed one who governed the unseen. For all his distance, Hades' presence was felt in everyday life. Farmers turned soil that belonged to him. Miners sought metals from his depths. Families buried their dead into his earth, trusting that he would keep them. To live was to exist under Zeus's sky. To sail was to risk Poseidon's seas. But to die was to enter Hades' realm. He was the inevitable, the unavoidable, and the enduring. And so, Hades remained a figure both feared and respected, not hated but acknowledged. His underworld was not only a place of shadows, but a mirror of the human experience. Uncertain, sometimes frightening, but also part of the natural order. For the Greeks, Hades was proof that even the gods had roles they could not escape, and that death, like the sea and sky, was simply another part of the world to be understood, honored, and respected. The Olympian family was unlike any family mortals had ever known. It was vast, complicated, and filled with both love and rivalry. At the center were the three great brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, who divided the world between them after the defeat of the Titans. But around them stood a circle of other gods and goddesses, each with their own personality, domain, and importance in Greek life. Together they made up a divine household that mirrored human families, with all their strengths, quarrels, and contradictions. For the Greeks, the Olympians were not distant, perfect beings. They were powerful, yes, but also deeply relatable in their flaws and emotions. Athena was one of the most admired among the Olympians. Born fully grown and armored from the head of Zeus, she represented wisdom, strategy, and skill. She was calm, thoughtful, and disciplined, a goddess who guided heroes and protected cities. Athens, the great city-state, bore her name, and her olive tree symbolized peace and prosperity. Unlike some of the other gods, she was not swayed by reckless passion. She valued reason over impulse, and mortals often looked to her for guidance in both war and peace. Apollo, the god of light, music, and prophecy, brought a very different kind of energy to Olympus. He was youthful and radiant, associated with the sun and with all things bright and harmonious. His music was said to soothe even the most troubled hearts, and his oracle at Delphi became one of the most important centers of Greek religion, where mortals traveled to seek glimpses of the future. Apollo embodied beauty and order, but like his father Zeus, he could also be prideful and unforgiving when insulted. His twin sister Artemis, goddess of the hunt, was equally revered. She was the protector of wild animals and young women, often depicted with her bow and accompanied by deer or hounds. Independent and strong, she represented freedom and the untamed aspects of nature. Mortals prayed to her for safe childbirth, and hunters honored her before setting out. She was fierce in her independence, punishing those who disrespected her while offering protection to those who honored her domain. Then there was Ares, the god of war. Unlike Athena, who represented strategy and intelligence, Ares embodied the brutal, chaotic side of battle, the bloodlust, the noise, and the fury. He was often disliked even by the other gods for his reckless violence. Yet he symbolized a reality the Greeks could not ignore. War was always present, and its destruction was a force that shaped their world. His presence on Olympus reminded everyone of the darker side of human conflict. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, brought a gentler but equally powerful influence. Born from the sea foam, she was associated with passion, desire, and the bonds that drew people together. Yet her beauty was not only a blessing, it caused envy, rivalry, and conflict among gods and mortals alike. With her charm she could sway hearts, and with her temper she could sow discord. In her, the Greeks saw the irresistible force of love, both its joys and its dangers. Hermes, the messenger god, added speed and wit to the Olympian family. He was clever, resourceful, and mischievous, guiding travelers and protecting merchants. With his winged sandals he moved swiftly between the mortal world and Olympus, carrying messages and guiding souls to the underworld. Mortals admired his cleverness, but they also knew he was a trickster, a god who could play pranks even on his fellow Olympians. He represented cunning and adaptability, qualities that were as important in survival as strength or wisdom. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, was another vital figure. Her presence meant fertile fields, full granaries, and food for survival. When she was content, the earth flourished. But when she grieved, as in the story of her daughter Persephone's descent into the underworld, the world suffered famine. She embodied the cycle of life and sustenance, reminding mortals of their deep dependence on the rhythms of the natural world. There were others, too. Hephaestus, the smith and craftsman who forged weapons and wonders for gods and heroes, Dionysus, god of wine, revelry, and ecstasy, whose followers sought freedom from the rigid order of life, and Hestia, goddess of the hearth, who represented home family and the steady warmth of fire. Each god or goddess filled a role in the great tapestry of Olympus, shaping different aspects of existence. What made the Olympian family so fascinating was not just their individual powers, but the way they interacted. They quarreled, competed, and tested one another, just as human families did. They were jealous, proud, and sometimes reckless. Yet they also celebrated, feasted, and came together when balance was threatened. Their stories offered the Greeks lessons about life, not in perfection, but in struggle, compromise, and resilience. For mortals, the Olympians were both awe-inspiring and familiar. They could bless crops, calm seas, or send plagues. They could protect a city or destroy it. But at the same time, their emotions and flaws made them easier to understand. They were powerful mirrors of human life, showing that even in divine realms, family was never simple, and so the Olympian family stood on Mount Olympus, looking down upon the world of mortals. Each one had their realm, their symbols, and their followers. Together, they formed a divine household that reflected the hopes, fears, and contradictions of the people who worshipped them. The Greeks looked up at their gods and saw not distant perfection, but something much more relatable. Beings who were grander than humans, yet not so different after all. The myths that the Greeks told about their gods and heroes were more than just stories. They were the way people made sense of the world around them. These tales carried explanations for why the seasons changed, why storms rolled across the sea, why love could lift someone to joy or drive them into despair. The myths were not written in heavy books at first. They were passed down by storytellers, sung by poets, and whispered in marketplaces. They were entertainment, yes, but they were also lessons and warnings, and sometimes even comfort in a world that often felt uncertain. One of the reasons the myths were so powerful is that they mixed the ordinary with the extraordinary. A god might walk among mortals, disguised as a stranger, testing the kindness of a household. A hero might rise from humble beginnings to achieve greatness, only to fall because of pride or temptation. These stories reflected everyday concerns: hospitality, family loyalty, courage, and the dangers of arrogance, but they wrapped them in dazzling adventures of monsters, magic, and divine intervention. In this way, the Greeks could see their own lives mirrored in the struggles of heroes and the tempers of gods. Take the story of Icarus, for example. A boy with wings made of wax and feathers, he soared into the sky with the freedom of flight. But, warned not to fly too close to the sun, he ignored the advice. The wax melted, and he fell into the sea. The story is simple, but its meaning is deep. Too much ambition, unchecked by wisdom, can lead to ruin. It was a tale parents might tell their children, and philosophers might ponder as a reminder of human limits. Other myths offered lessons about love and loyalty. The story of Orpheus and Eurydice spoke of devotion so strong that it reached into the underworld. Orpheus, the great musician, charmed even Hades with his song, winning the chance to bring back his wife, Eurydice. Yet he failed the test of trust, glancing back at her before they reached the surface, and lost her forever. To the Greeks, this was both heartbreaking and instructive. Love is powerful, but doubt and impatience can undo even the deepest bonds. Many myths also explained natural phenomena in ways that felt alive. The tale of Persephone and Demeter gave meaning to the cycle of the seasons, showing how the goddess of harvest mourned in winter and rejoiced in spring. The myth of Apollo driving his golden chariot across the sky explained the rising and setting of the sun. These stories connected human life with the vast rhythms of the cosmos, reminding people that they were part of a greater order shaped by divine forces. The myths were also filled with cautionary tales about hubris, the dangerous pride of trying to match or outdo the gods. King Midas, who wished that everything he touched would turn to gold, soon discovered that his gift was a curse when food, and even his own daughter, transformed into lifeless metal. Narcissus, who fell in love with his own reflection, wasted away until he became a flower. These stories warned the Greeks that greed, vanity, and arrogance could destroy a person. Respecting limits and honoring the gods was a lesson repeated again and again. Yet not all myths were grim. Many were told simply to entertain, with laughter and wonder. The clever tricks of Hermes, the drunken mischief of Dionysus, the comical bickering of gods on Olympus. These brought humor into the tapestry of myth. They showed that the divine world, for all its grandeur, was also filled with the same arguments, jokes, and follies that shaped mortal households. This familiarity made the gods seem closer, less distant, and easier to imagine. For the Greeks, myths were not just tales for children or fireside amusement. They were part of festivals, rituals, and religious life. Plays performed in amphitheaters retold the tragedies of heroes, drawing crowds who saw in them both art and moral reflection. Poets like Homer and Hesiod shaped the myths into epics that became cultural foundations, memorized and recited for centuries. Each retelling kept the myths alive, shifting slightly with time and audience, but always carrying their core lessons forward. What makes these myths so enduring, even for us today, is their universality. We may no longer believe that Zeus throws thunderbolts or that Poseidon shakes the earth, but we still understand the feeling of fear before a storm, or the struggle of ambition, or the heartbreak of lost love. The Greeks gave these feelings shape through stories that were larger than life but rooted in the deepest parts of being human. That is why their myths continue to be told, reimagined in books, films, and art long after the temples crumbled. And so, the myths the Greeks told were more than simple entertainment. They were a mirror, showing people their strengths and flaws, their joys and tragedies. They taught humility, celebrated bravery, and reminded mortals of their place in a vast and mysterious world. Through gods and heroes, monsters and trials, the Greeks explored what it meant to live, to love, to suffer, and to hope. These stories, born thousands of years ago, still echo today because the lessons they carry are timeless. Even after the days of ancient Greece had passed, the myths did not fade away. They lingered in temples, echoed in poetry, and lived on in theater, becoming part of the cultural fabric of the Mediterranean world and beyond. The stories of gods and heroes were so deeply woven into Greek life that when the Greek city-states declined and later fell under Roman control, their myths continued to flourish, reshaped but never forgotten. These tales carried a weight far heavier than ordinary stories. They were echoes that passed through time, traveling from one generation to the next, carried by words, art, and memory. Temples dedicated to the Olympians stood as reminders of their presence. In Athens, the Parthenon celebrated Athena, the city's patron goddess, her figure carved into marble, her wisdom immortalized in stone. Across Greece, sanctuaries honored Zeus, Poseidon, Apollo, and Hera, with rituals and festivals that bound communities together. Even when empires rose and fell, the ruins of these places remained, silent but powerful, reminding people that once the gods were believed to walk among them. Poets and playwrights gave the myths voices that carried far and wide. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey were not just entertainment, but shared cultural memory, shaping how Greeks thought about honor, loyalty, and the human struggle against fate. Hesiod's Theogony set down the genealogy of the gods, a map of divine history that explained where the Olympians came from. In theaters, tragedies by Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides turned myth into drama, their words echoing across stone amphitheaters under the open sky. To sit among the audience was not just to watch a performance, it was to participate in the living retelling of stories that defined a people. When the Romans adopted Greek culture, they carried the myths with them, giving the gods new names but keeping their essence. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Poseidon became Neptune. Roman poets like Ovid retold the stories, adding new layers but preserving the old. In this way, Greek mythology stepped beyond Greece itself, becoming part of the wider world. Even as religions changed and new faiths rose, the myths survived, embedded in literature, art, and education. During the Middle Ages, much of classical knowledge seemed at risk of vanishing, yet the myths lingered in hidden corners. Monks copied old texts, Scholars debated ancient ideas, and artists found inspiration in faded stories. By the time of the Renaissance, Europe rediscovered Greek mythology with renewed passion. Painters filled canvases with gods and goddesses. Sculptors carved them anew in marble. Poets and playwrights revived their tales for new audiences. The myths had crossed centuries of silence to emerge alive once again, their echoes stronger than ever. These echoes reached into philosophy and science as well. Early thinkers used the myths to frame questions about the universe, morality, and the human soul. While myths were not seen as literal truth, they offered a symbolic language that shaped how people thought about life and meaning. Even as rational thought grew, the stories remained, not as history but as cultural touchstones that still spoke to the heart. Today, the echoes of Greek mythology surround us in ways both obvious and subtle. The names of planets honor Roman versions of Greek gods: Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Neptune. Brands and companies borrow names like Nike, Hermes, or Apollo, connecting their products to ancient symbols of strength, speed, or beauty. Films and novels reimagine heroes like Achilles, Odysseus, and Hercules, weaving their journeys into modern adventures. Schoolchildren still read the myths, and writers still find inspiration in tales thousands of years old. What is striking is how flexible the myths have been. They can be retold as grand epics or gentle bedtime stories, as serious tragedies or playful comedies. Each retelling carries the core of the myth forward, but shaped for its time and audience. This adaptability is why the myths never died. They were never locked in one version. They were alive, breathing with each storyteller, echoing differently in each new voice. For the Greeks themselves, myths were ways of making sense of their world. For us, they are windows into theirs, and also mirrors for our own. We still ask the same questions. What is love? What is honor? Why do we suffer? How should we live? In the gods and heroes of Greek myth, we see not just ancient answers, but timeless reflections. And so the echoes continue. From the stones of ruined temples to the pages of Renaissance books, from the theaters of Athens to the screens of modern cinema, the myths of Greece have never truly gone silent. They carry across centuries, softened at times, reshaped at others, but always present, always whispering the same timeless truths. The Greeks told their stories to remember who they were, and we retell them to remember who we are. The legacy of the Greek gods is something that has never truly faded. Though temples crumbled, and though belief in Zeus, Hera, and the rest of the Olympians disappeared long ago, their presence lingers in ways that are surprisingly close to us. They no longer sit on Mount Olympus in the minds of people as divine beings who command the world, but their images. Names and stories continue to shape the way we think, the way we speak, and even the way we dream. In many ways, they are more alive now than they were in ancient Greece, because they have traveled far beyond the boundaries of their homeland to become part of a global memory. When we look at language, we see their influence. Words like Titanic remind us of the Titans, beings of immense strength who came before the Olympians. Chronology comes from Cronus, the Titan of time. Martial comes from Mars, the Roman version of Ares, god of war. Every time we speak these words, we are echoing ancient stories without even realizing it. The myths, woven into language, have become part of daily life. In art, their presence is even stronger. Renaissance painters returned to Greek myths for inspiration, creating masterpieces filled with gods, heroes, and mythic landscapes. Sculptors carved marble figures of Apollo, Venus, and Hercules, capturing the timeless beauty of these stories in stone. Even in modern times, filmmakers retell the myths, sometimes with accuracy, sometimes with invention, but always with fascination. Children grow up watching cartoons or reading books that introduce them to Zeus and Athena, Persephone and Hades, keeping the cycle alive. The legacy also extends into science and exploration. Astronomers named planets and moons after gods and heroes: Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, Europa, Io, Titan. Spacecraft have carried names like Apollo, reaching for the heavens just as the myths once imagined gods riding across the sky. Even in exploring the universe, humanity looks back to Greek stories for symbols of ambition and discovery. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of all, however, is the way these myths still speak to human nature. They remind us that people have always wondered about love, power, fate, and the meaning of life. The Greeks turned those questions into stories that captured both the beauty and the struggle of existence. When we read about Prometheus stealing fire, we see the price of knowledge. When we follow Odysseus on his journey, we feel the longing for home. When we hear about Pandora opening her box, we recognize the dangers of curiosity, but also the persistence of hope. These lessons are not confined to the ancient world. They are still our lessons, too. The gods themselves, with their flaws and passions, remain strangely relatable. Unlike distant, perfect beings, the Olympians were unpredictable, emotional, and very human in their behavior. They quarreled, they loved, they punished, they forgave. In them, the Greeks saw reflections of themselves, magnified to divine proportions. And today, we continue to find comfort in those reflections, because they remind us that imperfection is part of the human story, not something to be denied. The myths also continue to inspire new creations. Writers and artists use them as building blocks for modern stories, blending old themes with new settings. From novels to films, from theater to video games, the gods and heroes of Greece keep returning, reshaped for new audiences. Each generation finds something in them, a reminder of courage, a warning about arrogance, or simply the joy of a good story told again. And so, the legacy of the Greek gods is not locked in the past. It flows like a river, moving through centuries and across cultures, carrying with it fragments of ancient belief that still feel alive. To study them is not only to look back at history, but to understand how stories connect us to one another across time. The Greeks may have told their myths under starlit skies thousands of years ago, but those same stories still find their way into our own evenings, our own imaginations, and perhaps even our own dreams. The gods may no longer be worshipped as divine rulers, but they remain as guides of imagination, teachers of timeless lessons, and companions in storytelling. Their world of Olympus and underworld, of love and betrayal, of triumph and tragedy, is still ours to enter whenever we close our eyes and listen. This is their true legacy, that they have never really left us, and likely never will. And so, our journey through Greek mythology comes to a peaceful close. From the vast emptiness of chaos to the rise of the Olympians, we've seen how stories were told to explain the world, to give meaning to storms, and stars to love and loss, to everything that makes life mysterious and beautiful. The Greeks may have lived thousands of years ago, but their myths are still with us, alive in books, in art, in the names of planets, and in the stories we tell today. Perhaps that is their greatest gift, to remind us that imagination can outlast time, and that even in the quiet of night we can still hear echoes of the gods. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you'll never miss more gentle tales from history. Until next time, may you sleep well, and may the timeless myth of the past carry you into peaceful dreams.